have a baby I can hold up right now, I just want to hold a baby way above my head and circle of life. My daughters love Mulan. They just watched it this week, and they've been asking about Mulan 2 because they know like we keep making sequels to these movies, and I keep pretending there isn't a Mulan 2 because it was a direct-to-video and it's probably awful. So don't tell them. But we just watched a bunch of awesome animated stuff they would love. So we've been talking about the hero's journey, and talking about these Easter eggs and archetypes we see throughout the Old Testament and through the New Testament too. And there's like a certain story and archetype we want to see our heroes complete, and we know this to be true. We've talked about this. This isn't just like something that like the people who wrote down the scripture, like, hey, let me just follow this journey and I'm going to make this story up. This is like a true story that we see repeated time and time again since Genesis on. And so the hero's journey, a quick overview of that is departure, initiation, return. These kind of these big sections. And the departure is like people living in this ordinary world. Then there's a call to adventure, and they say, no, I don't want to go, refusal of the call. And then they meet their mentor, they meet their Obi-Wan, they meet their person who's going to kind of, not Mufasa, what was the monkey's name? Oh, man. Rafiki, yeah. You meet Rafiki, and you cross the first threshold, and you make that step towards that. And then the initiation, there's tests, allies, and enemies, and you approach the inmost cave, and you have this big ordeal, and there's a reward. And then you kind of take the road back, and this is what we just saw here, the resurrection, where the part of the movie where they take what they've learned, or they take like all this part, or they literally resurrect like Mr. Beast did, and they kind of come back, and they're there. And then there's the return. And like returning with the elixir is the the official of that, but we call it the return. And so this is the part of the movie at the end that we all love to see. You know, it's kissing and hugging and kissing, and it's the best part. And everyone's made right, fair, just. It's hopefully a happy ending. And like you have your happily ever after, you have the end show up, and the hero's journey is made complete. And so last week we kind of celebrated that with Jesus and this ultimate hero who we see is like takes the whole hero's journey and brings it to us. And it doesn't follow it perfectly for Jesus, but we see him do this resurrection, and we're all happy and as to celebrate. He died, and on the third day he rose, and he did it. He broke sin's hold in our lives, and we no longer have to be like slaves to sin, and we all live happily ever after, don't we? And we think, right? And we don't stay in this return phase forever. The rest of us end up back in this little circle of life, ordinary world, don't we? And we have to go back to our jobs. And so last week, we had this height, like even there's something special even at Action Church about Easter. I say that's really, really demeaning. I'm sorry. Thank you for coming to Action Church. But there's something special about Easter, and you feel that. And then Monday, y'all go back to work, and it's like, all right, ordinary life, ordinary world, here we go again. And so we're back to our real lives and our real problems and our schools and our work and our families, our friends, our ailments, all of our bodies. And this is, again, I'm 31 years old, all right? So I'm not that old, but I'm old compared to myself. But like watching Simba like do that flip over after Scar tries to like push him over, like I'm like, next morning in his ordinary world, his back was sore from doing that little flip up to save himself. And so we all wake up on Mondays and after Easter, and we're just there, and we're gonna have an ordinary world kind of hit you hard. And we see this kind of archetype even like when you go through a Netflix binge, like you watch all these shows and you get to the end of the return, and then you're like, there's nothing else. There's no journey. Now I don't know what to do with myself. I finished all of Scrubs. I finished The whole Office. Like I guess I'll watch it again, or you watch 20 movies like for 10 years, and then you come watch Endgame this weekend, and you're like, it's over. And spoiler warning, I'm going to ruin this movie for you. I'm kidding. I'm not going to. That was just, some of you are like, oh, no, I haven't seen it yet either, and I would never do that. I was, when Infinity War came out, Josh and I went to see it one night, and so, again, I'm 31 years old, and I know I'm not that old, but I can't make it through even a 2.5-hour movie without peeing. So I'm in the bathroom before Josh is there doing my thing in the stall, and this brat little kid comes into the bathroom, right, coming after watching Infinity War, and I'm sitting there, and I could hear him winding up like, man, you should have seen it. And this is Infinity War. I'm not talking about Endgame. It's okay. And he's like, it was so sad. I'm like, no. And so I'm there, like I had my phone, but I put that away. I'm like, I have my hands on my ears. I'm literally humming to myself so that I don't have a stupid movie spoiled by this stupid kid. Anyways, and so I am having flashbacks of that. Fast forward to Endgame. Again, not spoiling, haven't seen it, I'm not going to tell you anything. I was shopping Friday night. I was in Tampa this week at our office, and I was looking through some stuff, and I heard the cashier starting to talk about Endgame. I'm like, oh no! Like I'm ready to like flip over the table that I'm looking at stuff and like get out of there quick. And they were just talking about it was hard to get tickets. I couldn't tell. I thought it was really hard and difficult. I was like, oh no, I don't want to hear. So, anyways, you get to this end of these movies. And we want this to you want this to be the ultimate conclusion. But then after Endgame, I mean, there's going to be more Marvel movies, I'm sure. But what do? Back to ordinary lives. Back to we had this momentous occasion. And this is a pattern that shows up in our lives over and over again. And Rachel and I have been married 9 years here in April. And this is a picture from our honeymoon. We got married back in 2010. And there you go. Endearing, yeah, I know. So we went to Jamaica for our honeymoon. And, it was unlimited fine dining. We had 9 restaurants to choose from, or 20, I don't know. And breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all you can eat, and unlimited premium spirits. It was a typical, it's a Sandals prototype resort, whatever. 7 bars and this awesome swim-up bar. It was the best. And so for us, this was the return. Like, it was awesome. Like, we were all celebrating as it happens in the return. You hug and you kiss and you kiss and you hug. And anyways, only one person gets that joke. Thank you. But so we felt like kings and queens. Like, you're like, yes, this is the ultimate. And then the honeymoon is over, and you go back to your real lives. And Rachel and I, we were pretending, in Sandals, that, we paid for it. We had the cash to pay for that honeymoon, but that was like all of our cash. And so you come back to your real lives, and it looks more like this. And this is our first Hobbit home, we like to call it. And we didn't have 7 pools, and there wasn't a swim-up bar. And frankly, it wasn't unlimited free drinks and free food. We had to pay for stuff again. And again, I don't want to say, like, in our minds, we were poor. We were trying to save money, trying to pay off student loan. We had this debt we had to pay off. And so we lived here. You go from this beautiful resort to this room. That one picture is a space heater. That was our bedroom because the bedroom we had didn't have air conditioning or heat. It had a space heater in the winter and an air conditioner unit in the summer. And it was cold, it was freezing, and it was home for us for the first year. But so perfect, ultimate, like, return and then down back to ordinary lives. The first night we got home, Rich and I were just talking about this week. She went to put her toothbrush in like the toothbrush holder, and it didn't fit, and that was the breakdown. That was when it all fell apart. There was lots of tears shed, and we were like, we're not in Jamaica anymore. And I was like, oh my God, like she's crying. This is my wife. I don't know how to help her now. Anyway, so you have to learn to live in that ordinary world. And so it's just like, it feels like such a, like, not a letdown, but ordinary life can really suck sometimes, especially when you have such these awesome mountaintop experiences. And so I want to talk about how we transition from what Jesus did with the resurrection and return and this big celebration into our ordinary lives. Jesus rose from the dead, and now what? Like, back to ordinary life. And Jesus is our hero. We've talked about this the last couple weeks, so I'm not putting us into the hero's journey, but how do we live our ordinary lives? And so after the resurrection happened, Jesus, came back. He showed up with a couple of people. Don put the lovely "to be concluded." I love it when he puts a little cliffhanger for me to finish up. I think I heard someone ask, "So how are you going to pull us together?" It's like, haha, not my problem. So that was really nice of him. But I want to talk a little bit about Acts here real quick. So the first church, Jesus comes back. He is raised from the dead. He sees a couple of people, and then eventually he ascends into heaven, and the disciples are standing there looking up. He's gone. And I love this in Acts 4. They kind of started the first church and started preaching. And it says, this is kind of an Action Church motto verse here. It says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. So these guys were perfectly ordinary men, fishermen, average dudes, common guys, personalities, obvious weaknesses. I mean, Peter's mentioned in here, and Peter was like one of the worst people when you read through the Gospels. Like, oh my gosh, he keeps messing up. And so people saw them and noted that they had been with Jesus, but they were just ordinary. And then you fast forward a little bit later to the end of Acts. in Acts 17, Paul and Silas, and this isn't the main point, so I'll let you guys go read this on your own. Acts is, a great book to see what happens next. It's a good way to come off of Easter. But Paul and Silas had just kind of gotten out of prison, and they had, an angel had saved them, and it was awesome. And it comes to this, and they were talking about trying to find them. And so it says, and when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the other brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. And Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." These men have turned the world upside down. These unschooled, ordinary men have turned the world upside down. So there's something that we can learn from them. There's what have they done that's a little bit different or weird, or what are these ordinary guys doing? And this kind of leads me to something I want you guys to we're going to walk through this morning. It was ordinary people doing ordinary things with gospel intentionality. And gospel intentionality is very much a preacher thing, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But ordinary people doing ordinary things. What did they do? If you and I can be ordinary people doing ordinary things, what can we learn from that? And so I have three kind of overviews, and another spoiler alert, not an endgame kind of spoiler alert, but it's going to be a love God, love people, take action sermon. So it's kind of in our DNA here, but ordinary Christian life is, I think, three things, and this is really basic, but you're obeying God, Jesus' first commandment. One, you're going to love your neighbor as yourself. So we love God, love people, and loving our neighbors is how we be ordinary. It's an ordinary, so regular, because anybody can do it, and it doesn't take lots of money, or it doesn't take lots of time, or maybe it does take a lot of time, but we can do simple things to just love our neighbors. And so part of doing it is, number two, is being with our neighbors. To be someone's neighbor, yeah, you can live next to them, but if you never talk to them, you're just more neighbors and word and not actually talking to them. And this isn't to brag on us, we made cookies for our neighbors and took them to them, and they were like, "Oh, this is so sweet," and they loved it so much. And it wasn't it wasn't anything special. It was just an opportunity to say hi and talk to our neighbors, and actually instead of just living next to them, actually talk to them. And so I think it's important to be with our neighbors, and I think this follows Jesus' example. In Luke it says, the Son of Man, who's Jesus, the Son of Man came eating and drinking with all the people. So you see time and time again throughout the gospel, Jesus isn't just having neighbors, he's actually spending time at the dinner table with them. And so I think hospitality is a major part of this. I know the ladies group talked about this a couple months ago in their series they were on about spending time at the table with your friends and family and neighbors is how we can live ordinary Christian lives loving others. And then the third, so we have Jesus' commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves. We have Jesus' example as the Son of Man. He came eating and drinking. And then finally, in James 1:27, James, the brother of Jesus, said that true religion is this, to care for the widows and orphans. So caring for the vulnerable is how we practice our religion, how we practice our Christian life. And this isn't necessarily always just widows and orphans, it's the vulnerable. Who among us needs our love and needs something a little extra, some ordinary life brought into them? And ordinary is not sexy. Just like I'm not going to talk about restaurant supplies again because I work for a restaurant store. We sell restaurant supplies and equipment. It's not sexy either. This is a common theme in my life. Do a lot of unsexy things. But ordinary is not a call to be radical or be crazy or look at me. It's really just simple living, loving our neighbors. And you don't have to be a mega church pastor. You don't have to be somebody who sells restaurant supplies and comes up on a stage on a Sunday morning and to be ordinary. You don't have to be a lawyer who's fighting for justice for the poor, or a missionary who's going to a foreign country, or a podcast. You're going to have a podcast that's going to save the world. Us, each in our ordinary jobs, in our simple lives, can love our neighbors, which is fulfilling the call of Jesus and what he's asked us to do. And so we can walk as humble, ordinary, simple people and do justice and love and eat with others and care for others right in our neighborhoods. And so Action Church is built on this, right? We're not it's really pretty simple. We get together on Sunday mornings to talk about God, and we look for opportunities for us to go love our neighbors in our everyday, ordinary life week. Action Church does this really cool thing. I want to show you a clip of this. We support Bridge of Hope, and it's a local organization that helps the vulnerable among us. It helps homeless moms kind of get their lives together and start moving into a better direction for their lives. So I want to show you this video of someone that Action Church worked with.
I didn't want no one to help me. I didn't want anyone to know what I was going through. I had this image that, I was smiling through all the stuff that I was going through and I was going to be okay. I was kind of living out of my car. I started getting more away and away from my daughter. I said something has to change. I came to Bridge of Hope because I felt like I was at a dead end. I kind of had to tell myself, these are people you don't know. You have to learn how to trust them. So I was kind of scared, like I didn't want them in my business, but how am I going to let them help me through this program if I don't let them? After I gained trust, they became more like family and friends. I knew that I could trust them and tell them things. And the relationship that we built and the bond that we built was one of the things that I appreciated the most throughout the entire thing. Kind of knew that I was where I wanted to be when I was able to, budget my money and say, okay, you can't do this, or you have to save, or, remember some of the things that you learned throughout the program about yourself. I'm able to trust even my coworkers even. Just like I was able to trust my neighboring volunteers. I got into a position at my job that I never thought I would. They offered me a leadership position as a supervisor on second shift. I never saw that coming. But, I started showing that I cared, about myself and what I was doing and my job. And I think it just made a huge impact with my life and how things have been ever since I graduated.
So I said Action Church did this, but we didn't do this. Bridge of Hope did this, and Action Church got to support what this did. But this was ordinary people doing ordinary things. She mentioned in there the neighboring. So being a friend, being a neighbor to her, and kind of guiding her along this path. She talked about like getting not a raise, but having a new position opportunity at work. Like, what can we do? Now, I'm not saying like everybody, let's go find jobs for all of our friends, but how can we help our neighbors have a better career path, or help or invest in people in simple ways that isn't just like, hey, let me give you $20 for groceries. Let me help you and invest in your lives and be a neighbor to you, be a friend. So Bridge of Hope, Raph mentioned this. We Action Church gives, so you through Action Church give the Bridge of Hope every month, and it's a great thing that you've already supported and continued. We actually, Nair was one of the people that we supported as a church, and this fits into the Action Church Home Depot stolen mentality. If you can do it, we can help. We want to help you do this. So Bridge of Hope is a fantastic organization that you can, as an ordinary person, do an ordinary thing with gospel intentionality and love these people in simple and easy ways. So I want to tell you a story of the Good Samaritan, and I know Good Samaritan is its own archetype, its own meme almost. Like we have organizations named Good Samaritan, and you can say, oh, that person was a Good Samaritan. Don this morning said to me, yeah, Good Samaritan came out and gave me some tea before, or some kind of drink while I was painting. So we have this thing that we see over and over again. And I want to tell you the story again. So here in Luke, it says, one day an expert in the law stood up to test him, Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? Jesus replied. How do you read it? Anytime I read about testing Jesus, it's like Jesus has to have a coy smile on his face. How do you read it? What do you think? And he answered, love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. He hit every single, heart, soul, mind, strength. All right, got them all. And love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus said. Do this and you will live. So he got it right? That's the love God, love people. But, of course, wanting to justify himself, you and I do this too, wanting to justify himself, he's like, but who is my neighbor? I want to know, tell me who my neighbor is. And so Jesus then tells them the story of the Good Samaritan, which is a parable that Jesus made up to illustrate a point. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the same road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So too, when a Levite came to the spot and saw him, he passed by on the other side. So a priest and a lawyer go into a bar, and this is a really, really simple parable. It's not that complicated. Here's a man, he got hurt, he's on the side of the road. The priest, priest comes by, and we expect, the priest to be a person, of faith and religion. He should stop and want to help him. Passes by on the other side of the road, and all of us are like, "Yep, religious people. I expect that out of them." But to this audience, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." And we can make excuses for him, like, well, maybe he needed to be clean for like the ceremony clean as a Jewish man living as a priest. And there's other people saying, well, he's coming from Jerusalem to Jericho, so he probably didn't need to be clean anymore. Regardless, he didn't stop. He moved to the other side. And then so too the Levite. So Levite, someone who knew the law, who was supposed to, love your neighbor as yourself is a thing that isn't just Jesus. It's also from the Old Testament that we have in their law. And he goes by on the other side. But when a Samaritan on a journey came upon him, he looked at him and had compassion. A Samaritan, and again, maybe you guys have heard this, but the Samaritans and Jewish people did not get along well. They kind of hated each other. So as a good teacher here, I will allow you to put whatever people group or person or politician you don't like. So some of you can say, but as this one person on this side who goes on a journey, and the others will say, as the 20 people who are trying to take this one person's job on the other side. So imagine your worst enemy or someone you really dislike. But when a Samaritan on a journey came upon him, he looked at him and had compassion. And this is going to be shocking to this audience because this is something we don't like. We're not rooting for this person. And he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put him on his own animal, brought him to the inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Take care of him, he said, and on my return I will repay you for any additional expense. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And I can hear Jesus pausing and waiting. And the man, the one who showed him mercy, replied the expert in the law. And so, again, I feel like kind of people point out here, too, that he didn't say the Samaritan because we wouldn't ever want to say he who must not be named or them who must not be named. We must say the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. So we kind of have this moral story that we can look at and be like, all right, so we need to love our neighbor. We need to love the person alongside the road. And actually, what's happening here is something even more interesting than that. Jesus kind of hid an Easter egg, and I love the illusion of, I feel like the lady down here at the tomb holding the Easter egg up. I can see Jesus has this Easter egg in his hand. This Easter egg, this isn't just a story to remind us to be, it's nice to teach in Sunday school to our kids, and hey, we need to love the person who, and sometimes it's the people who you don't expect who would loving, and we can love our neighbors. Jesus wasn't just pointing out the importance of loving a neighbor. He wanted to show how impossible it was to love a neighbor 100%. Look at this again. So Jesus, what is written in the law, and the guy says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. But when he justified himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? So instead of humbling himself, he wants to justify himself and say, well, how much do I need to love? Is there a limit? He wants to know the minimal requirements, and instead of embracing his neighbor, the lawyer just wants to be hey, how far do I need to go? Who exactly do I have to love? I want to love them, but not them, or give me some things here. And so, the Good Samaritan story is also about you can't have eternal life by just loving your neighbor. The resurrection happened. You can't love exactly as Jesus loved. That's the whole reason Jesus came to earth and died for us. And that's what Jesus is trying to teach this man, that it's not just that I can love my neighbor and then I get to heaven. There's something that happened there. Jesus came and died on the cross for us because nobody completely loves God and their neighbor the way the Bible demanded us. And so in the story, Jesus is saying, hey, listen, I know that this is the worst thing possible, and a lawyer just gets sad and wants to walk away because he wants to justify himself by how he's doing. And so as much as I think the ordinary Christian life is loving our neighbors, is doing ordinary things, it's not necessarily the way we become Christians or how we start that ordinary life. And the other kind of cool archetype here I saw too, the Good Samaritan. Really, we have the Great Samaritan in Jesus, right? Jesus is the ultimate Good Samaritan. And that's not something necessarily Luke, the writer of this gospel, was trying to communicate. but it's still a true hero's journey, isn't it? Like, we see that the Good Samaritan did this, but Jesus did it perfectly. And Jesus was also despised and rejected by his own people, just like the Samaritan. And he acted differently, but he acted differently than the religious other professionals caring for the weak and the marginalized. And so out of all of this, it's grace, not guilt. Our ordinary people doing ordinary things. Jesus lived the life that we couldn't live and died for us so that we could be saved from these things, from death. And so we don't have guilt, we don't serve, we don't love, we don't do ordinary things for our neighbors because we are trying to make our way to heaven or try to do great things. We do them because Jesus loved us. And so it's grace, not guilt. And it kind of points us to Jesus and saying, okay, because of Jesus, I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. And so it's ordinary people doing ordinary things with gospel intentionality, with knowing that because Jesus did this for me, I'm going to also go love others. Because I have been saved and I've been low or I have also not measured up, I'm going to love people who also don't measure up. Later on, in John's gospel, there's this verse that says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And so, because of what Christ did for us, dying for us, what can we do? Eli, if you can come back up and play some more music. But I want to leave you with this. Who is the dying man on your road? So we can follow the example of the great Samaritan, Jesus, and we can love, and we have the good Samaritan we can know, but how do we as ordinary people, how do we find these people that we're going to love and continue, be intentional about loving them? And so ordinary Christian life, as I mentioned before, is we have the imperative of love your neighbor as yourself, and we see Jesus' example of being with our neighbors and being hospitable to our neighbors and having people for dinner or going out for lunch with someone or spending time, taking some time to get to know them on another level. And we also have the true religion is this, to love the widows and the orphans and to serve them. So caring for the vulnerable. And we're going to do all of this out of grace, not guilt, because one man died for us. So not out of guilt, but out of Jesus' grace for us, we're going to find the dying man on our road, which I do not wish that for anybody, but metaphorically, in an archetypal way, can we find somebody who we can love in our paths? So not in big, huge, I'm going to go throw a crazy party for this person, but in simple, ordinary life. So I'd like to pray for you for that. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this example of the Good Samaritan. I thank you for your example to us. I pray that in our lives that we don't go looking for crazy, crazy opportunities, but look for the simple and the opportunities that are kind of right in our paths, in our neighbors, in our family, here in our church, places that we can see an opportunity to love our neighbor just as you loved us. I thank you for this church who is putting this into action every day. In your name, amen.